Broadcasting from New York City to the world, it's the G-Man Interviews.
Malaysia Airlines Flight 17 departed Amsterdam at 12:15 p.m. local time. 298 people on board, 283 of them passengers, the rest crew members. The flight's path took the jet over Central and Eastern Europe before continuing on into Asia. But at 2:15, Ukraine's air traffic control lost contact with the aircraft while it was cruising at 33,000 feet.
A Malaysian Airlines flight with about 295 people on board has crashed, we are told.
Its last known location in the Donetsk region of eastern Ukraine, about 30 miles from the Russian border, an area rife with fighting between Ukrainian military forces and pro-Russian separatists. This video shows the moment of impact, parts of the plane crashing into a field, debris scattered for miles, personal belongings still intact on the ground. A reporter at the site described the horror.
It's a gruesome scene. There's bodies splayed out through the fields. People said the plane kind of exploded in the air, and everything rained down in bits and pieces. The plane itself, the people inside.
President Obama was notified on the phone by Russian President Vladimir Putin as initial reports began surfacing and pledged his support in any way possible.
I've directed my national security team to stay in close contact with the Ukrainian government. The United States will offer any assistance we can to help determine what happened and why.
A U.S. official later confirming to CNN that the plane was brought down by a surface-to-air missile, but exactly who fired that missile is still unknown. Ukraine's prime minister quickly laid the blame squarely on separatists. We do not call it an incident or a catastrophe, he said, but a terrorist action. There were already warnings for passenger planes flying over parts of Ukraine. The FAA had banned all U.S. commercial flights from flying through the Crimea region in April because of the ongoing conflict. But no such bans existed for flights over this part of eastern Ukraine.
Welcome. Joining me to discuss the latest developments on the situation regarding the crash of Malaysian Flight MH17 is Matthew Dubas, editor of the New Jersey-based publication, the Ukrainian Weekly. As noted in a previous interview with Mr. Dubas, the newspaper serves as a major source of information for members of the Ukrainian community throughout the United States and Canada. It's a pleasure to welcome you back to the show, Mr. Dubas.
Thank you, G-Man. It's good to be here.
I want to begin with the latest investigation into the crash of MH17. On July 29th, Reuters news agency reported that rebels in eastern Ukraine accused the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, also known as the OSCE, of serving U.S. and Ukrainian interests and threatened to ban the security and rights group from the crash site of the Malaysian airliner. What's the latest you have on that?
The latest we have right now is that there are reports of mines in the area of the crash site to prevent anybody from even accessing the site anymore, and it's disturbing to see how there is a lack of cooperation with the separatists to even secure the area, to even offer security for the observers and experts to make their investigation.
As of today, July 30th, Associated Press is reporting international observers turned back Wednesday after making another attempt to reach the site where a Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17 went down in eastern Ukraine. A government official said the area near the zone had been mined by pro-Russian separatists who control it. OSCE set out Wednesday in 2 vehicles without frustrated crash investigators from the Netherlands who have been trying to reach the site for 4 days. But the OSCE observers turned back to the city of Donetsk after discussions with rebels.
Militants have called the OSCE, which Russia is also a member of, serving U.S. and Ukrainian interests, but it also has a voice in the organization, so it's trying to manipulate or using the OSCE as a tool of U.S. and Ukrainian policy that it doesn't have any influence over, which it does. It's unfortunate that Russia is playing this game of information, and I'll go more into that later.
On July 29th, the House Committee on Foreign Affairs conducted a hearing on the crash, and one of its ranking members asked a panel of experts on Ukraine if it was possible that MH17 was brought down by equipment confiscated from Ukrainian military sites by pro-Russian separatists and not a Russian-issued weapon. Have you considered or looked into this possibility?
There is that possibility. I have not really seen much evidence as far as to suggest that it came directly from either a Ukrainian munitions factory or armament. It was shown on video that trucks were entering from Ukraine back into Russia, and one of the Buk missiles was missing. So either Russia is stealing Ukrainian military equipment, or it's going back to Russia once it came. Right now, the big news regarding the latest measures of the European Union and the U.S. is the sanctions that were announced. They're expected to last a year, with reviews conducted every 3 months. Trade restrictions between the EU and Russia will include areas of equipment for oil and defense sectors, and dual-use technologies that can be used in military and civilian purposes. Russian banks are also barred from raising funds in European capital markets, and EU members are being barred from buying bonds in banks with a 50% stake in Russian state ownership. The gas sector has remained untouched in this latest round of sanctions. Even Angela Merkel, German Chancellor, called the sanctions unavoidable. These coordinated efforts of the US and the EU would take more of a bite out of the Russian economy than previous sanctions that targeted individuals and certain organizations accused of direct involvement in threatening Ukraine. The sanctions also target, in addition to the aforementioned 20 organizations and 87 individuals, future contracts, and do not change the France-Russia deal on 2 Mistral-class warships that are expected to be delivered. Russia has also denied any involvement in supporting the militants of eastern Ukraine, and President Vladimir Putin does not show any signs of de-escalation of the unrest, and in fact is demonstrating a re-escalation following the downing of MH17. Putin had a chance to distance himself from the militants, or at least cut off supplies from Russia, but he did neither, and instead made moves that escalate the conflict. Putin had blamed the Ukrainian military operations in securing its own territory as reasoning for Russia's stance in supporting the militants. But Putin neglected to add that the militants were the ones who violated the ceasefires. Putin seems prepared to gamble on the future of his country's economy by hardening his stance. A ruling by The Hague recently imposed a $50 billion bill on Russia for expropriating the assets of the Yukos oil company. This is formerly owned by Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who was under a 10-year sentence and recently released just before the Sochi Olympics as a goodwill gesture. He is not involved in the case, and many in Russia do not recognize the rulings of international courts. And polls indicate that the majority of Russian citizens feel that Russia should pull out of the international courts in The Hague, London, and Vienna, and Stockholm. The ongoing anti-terrorist operation led by the Ukrainian military and Ukrainian volunteer forces has been making steady progress on the militant-controlled areas of Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Civilian casualties have been reported on both sides, with numbers in dispute on both sides. Mortar fire and Grad rockets have been cited in numerous reports from Russia, the US, and Ukraine as coming from the militants, the Ukrainian military, as well as Russian territory. Moscow has also accused Ukraine's military of firing into Russian territory. The U.S. ambassador to the OSCE, citing imagery, confirmed that evidence showed that artillery fire had originated from Russian territory. There is a report called Evidence of Russian Shelling into Ukraine. Much of the information was provided by the U.S. Director of National Intelligence. It was reported that the militant-held city of Horliivka in the Donetsk Oblast is going through a time of confusion, as it was reported that Russian Lieutenant Colonel Igor, the quote-unquote demon, Bezler, who is a Crimean native, a Russian citizen, and a Soviet veteran from the Afghanistan campaign and Russia's Chechnya war, is the quote-unquote leader of the Donetsk People's Republic military. And he has reportedly gone missing, supposedly fled, as well as militant leader Igor Gurkin. A mass grave was also discovered by the Ukrainian military in Slovyansk in the Donetsk region, where allegedly Russian-backed militants had murdered local residents who were seen as a threat to the insurgency.
Okay, you provided a lot of good information, but I want to hone in on the sanctions because of the crucial role they're going to play, alright? President Obama held a press conference yesterday, and here's a portion of what he said about the new sanctions and their intended targets.
Today, and building on the measures we announced 2 weeks ago, the United States is imposing new sanctions in key sectors of the Russian economy: energy, arms, and finance. We're blocking the exports of specific goods and technologies to the Russian energy sector. We're expanding our sanctions to more Russian banks and defense companies. And we're formally suspending credit that encourages exports to Russia and financing for economic development projects in Russia. At the same time, the European Union is joining us in imposing major sanctions on Russia, its most significant and wide-ranging sanctions to date. In the financial sector, the EU is cutting off certain financing to state-owned banks in Russia. In the energy sector, the EU will stop exporting specific goods and technologies to Russia, which will make it more difficult for Russia to develop its oil resources over the long term. In the defense sector, the EU is prohibiting new arms imports and exports and is halting the export of sensitive technology to Russia's military users. And because we're closely coordinating our actions with Europe, the sanctions we're announcing today will have an even bigger bite. Now, Russia's actions in Ukraine and the sanctions that we've already imposed have made a weak Russian economy even weaker. Foreign investors already are increasingly staying away. Even before our actions today, nearly $100 billion in capital was expected to flee Russia. Russia's energy, financial, and defense sectors are feeling the pain. Projections for Russian economic growth are down to near zero. The major sanctions we're announcing today will continue to ratchet up the pressure on Russia, including the cronies and companies that are supporting Russia's illegal actions in Ukraine. In other words, today, Russia is once again isolating itself from the international community, setting back decades of genuine progress. And it doesn't have to come to this. It didn't have to come to this. It does not have to be this way. This is a choice that Russia, and President Putin in particular, has made.
Do you feel that the U.S. and EU got it right by targeting these specific areas?
I think that it is amicable for all sides included. This is why they didn't target the gas sector, because they're thinking in the future towards winter and everything like that, and they don't want to upset that area that they really depend on Russia for until they can find a solution long term. Yeah, I think that it is a good way that it's coordinated. I think that in this round, I think the EU was allowed to lead, and the US followed suit to show a mutual cooperation and waiting, and the ability to wait. The clock is ticking, and you have to act sooner rather than later. But we're lucky to be where we are now.
You reported on President Putin for many years. How will he respond to the new sanctions?
Putin will claim that it doesn't affect him, or he is impervious to these measures, and for a large part of that, he's right. It's not necessarily targeted against him personally. It's targeted against the Russian people, because his circle of influence can't seem to be persuaded to change course.
But as a representative of the people, shouldn't he be concerned?
He will express he does concern himself for the people, and he will try to build this great Russian state and everything like that. But if the coffers are empty, where's the greatness?
Do you think President Putin would proceed with a full-scale invasion in spite of the new sanctions?
I believe that Putin has already proved himself to be unpredictable, and unless the U.S. is ready to put measures in place that will deter Putin's further expansion of his aggression, I believe that we will see more Putin's unpredictability.
We're only a few months into his presidency, but would you say that the majority of your readers are happy or unhappy with how President Poroshenko and his administration are handling the situation in Ukraine?
I believe that President Poroshenko is under immense pressure right now, and I think everybody is keeping a watchful eye on him, but commending him on the progress that already has been made thus far. Considering Parliament has voted to dissolve itself, Cabinet has resigned, Prime Minister has resigned. I think that because these measures are already in place, it will put more pressure on him to lead and to be able to reassure the people that whatever confusion is going on, it's only temporary.
I want to briefly touch upon something that I've been picking up on, particularly in the independent media. A number of news sources are reporting that the downing of the flight may have been part of a false flag operation by the U.S. and Ukraine government. Now, a lot of the sources that are reporting these don't even have sources on the ground. Apparently, a number of these agencies are taking actual news articles and combining them with articles posted on conspiracy theory websites and formulating their own opinion. So I'm wondering, given the fact that you actually have a source on the ground and are in touch with agencies and entities that are deeply embedded in Ukraine and covering the situation, what would you say to those that are issuing these reports?
I would say that these reports are unfounded, ungrounded, and they cannot have any validity because there are hundreds of dead people that you're saying are not dead, or something similar to that, which is a farce of reality. And I think that's telling of the game Putin is playing with his whole information hybrid warfare. Wikipedia has been the battleground for the information war going on between the U.S. and Russia. Certain Twitter feeds, like at UA.gov.edits, and at Congress edits, and at RU.gov.edits, have monitored such activity as the MH17 entry that disputed where the rocket came from and who fired it. Many of the IP user addresses have been from Russia's Federal Protection Service, the U.S. House of Representatives, as well as Ukrainian IP addresses. Russia Today, the Kremlin-sponsored propaganda arm, has been operating since 2005 and has had journalists quit, even live on the air, sending editorial policies and the outright lies purported by the station. In response to the hybrid nature of the war between Ukraine and Russia, in Ukraine, the Dnipropetrovsk governor has set up Ukraine Today, a counter to the Russian propaganda arm, bombarding not only Ukraine, but the Western world. Ukraine Today has been set up with the launch date of August 24th, which happens to be Ukrainian Independence Day, and is to be broadcast in Ukrainian, Russian, Crimean Tatar, and there's an English language service that is scheduled to launch by next year. This is all part of the big scheme of the information war.
Now you have free reign. If there's something else that you want to bring to light, this is the opportunity to do it. Feel free.
Sure. Former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, John Herbst, has said that Ukraine needs defense and military equipment to offset Russian influx of arms. This should include anti-terror, anti-aircraft, and anti-missile weapons. Ukraine also needs intelligence support. This, combined with coordinated U.S. and EU sanctions, will keep the pressure on Putin's military adventure in Ukraine and perhaps dissuade other such adventures in Moldova and Georgia. Now, the Ukrainian American community and Ukrainian Canadian community have been organizing these improved first aid kits that cost roughly $100, and the goal is to send 10,000 of them to Ukraine. Right now we're at 1,200. And these are available at patriotdefensewithac.org. And there's also a protest going on August 7th at the Russian mission to the UN in New York, which is located at 136 East 67th Street at 1 p.m. And if you support Ukraine, or you support Georgia, and you support democracy and people's right to choose, I would recommend that everybody attend this. There is a measure being proposed in the United States Congress called the Ukraine Security Assistance Act, which is co-sponsored by Jim Gerlach of Pennsylvania, Mark's Captor of Ohio, and Sandra Levin of Michigan. The legislation, which is numbered HR 5190, would designate Ukraine as a major non-NATO ally. Other MNA countries include Afghanistan, Argentina, Australia, Bahrain, Egypt, Israel, Japan, Jordan, Kuwait, Morocco, New Zealand, Pakistan, the Philippines, Thailand, and South Korea. This status would include participation in certain counter-terrorism operations, American financing for purchase or lease of certain defensive equipment, including depleted uranium anti-tank munitions, basing of Department of Defense war reserves, stockpiles for allies, priority delivery of excess military equipment, research and development projects with the Department of Defense, bidding for certain Department of Defense contracts, and reciprocal training.
Okay, another development the UK is actually in the process of sending battle troops to Poland. Do you suspect that President Putin will see this as a provocation or an act of aggression?
I'm sure he will. These 1,350 military personnel for training exercises that are supposed to begin in October is the largest UK commitment in the region since 2008. And the United Kingdom has already sent planes as part of its NATO cooperation into Poland, and this is the largest ground force that it is putting there. And in addition, it is adding 350 armored vehicles. This will play into the whole negotiation process, but Russia has already, put a ban on fruit from Poland entering into Russia. This is a start of another trade war that Europe can expect to see with individual countries as the sanctions and Russia's actions continue. The negotiation process will entirely depend on Russia. Russia will attempt to leverage EU trading partners to pressure Ukraine to capitulate to Russia's demands so that business can continue as usual. We can't allow the negotiations to recognize the Donetsk People's Republic or the Luhansk People's Republic. These are imaginary figments of Putin's imagination. We can't even give them a direct voice in the process. The DPR and LPR and Russia should be identified as agitators. The return of Crimea should also be on the table, or at least mentioned in the negotiations to restore Ukraine's territorial integrity.
With regard to that, for returning of Crimea, is that realistic at this point?
I think that it should be stated. Whether it's realistic or not, I think that the intention should be there, and it should be expressed by the negotiating partners. Otherwise, what's the point?
With all the measures that have been put in place by the U.S. and the EU in an attempt to stop President Putin, is this situation likely to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better?
Definitely. I think that we won't see the end of this crisis for a long time, and U.S.-Russia relations, Russia-Ukraine relations will suffer for decades as a result of this. And Putin, I'm not sure if he has that long-term vision in mind.
But it is his goal, according to a couple of pundits that I've watched on some of the major networks and historians who specialize in the region of the Ukraine. They're indicating that his ultimate goal, given his level of popularity in the country, is to be a quote-unquote lifetime president. Do you agree with that assessment? And if so, do you strongly believe that's one of the reasons why he's taking such a hardline position?
I think that Putin will have to try to maintain unity among his inner circle, and I think that the longer he's in office, the more difficult it will be for him to maintain that, especially if he continues this military adventurism in Ukraine and Georgia and in Moldova. And I think that it's unsustainable for him. Whether he thinks he'll be able to do it, that's his own fantasy, but the reality is another story.
As far as your relatives back home, what are they telling you about the situation?
My relatives in eastern Ukraine, in Berdyansk, they've been telling me that the shelling has been getting closer and closer, and they could actually see the plumes of smoke not too far from where they reside. And for them, it's a matter of evacuation, or you're going to stay and suffer the shelling. It's drawing a lot of parallels between Israel and the Palestinian conflict with indiscriminate bombing or targeted bombing. It's two different things. The way that the Ukrainian military is professionally going in and taking care of individual targets, whereas the Russian military has no concept of reducing civilian casualties or anything like that.
And if your family members are forced to flee, where are they likely to go, or where could they go? Is there any place at this point that will be considered a safe haven?
I would say that right now a lot of people are heading either into the northwest or into the direct west of Ukraine. Some are able to either get into Poland or other areas. There's roughly 13,000 Crimean Tatar refugees that are in Ukraine right now. It's an ongoing process that we're still keeping an eye on. It's just developing as we go.
Thank you for continuing to provide these vital updates, Mr. Dubas. I greatly appreciate it.
Thank you, G-Man.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time, stay cool, stay safe, and stay informed.